This is part 4, examining the significance of Playgirl magazine in Kubrick's The Shining. Recall that we are analyzing this letter from page 10 of the January 1978 issue of Playgirl magazine. Recall from parts 2 and 3 that we've decoded a message in each one of those parts, and in this current video what I want to do is decode 3 more messages for you. And as we will see, these 3 messages are related to the message which was decoded in part 2, which is this message right here, where, as you can see, Stanley Kubrick is telling us, or is giving us an insight as to what happened at the Taliesin massacre on August 14th, 1915. And so with that, let's get started. Now, these 3 messages are relatively short compared to the first 2, but they are important that they offer some context and insight as to what was going on with the Taliesin massacre. The 3 groups of words we're going to be using I've highlighted in 3 different colors, as you can see here: red, green, and blue. And I want to spend a few minutes justifying to you why I chose these words, or why I zeroed in on them in the first place. Once you realize that Kubrick is using this letter to hide messages, you start scrutinizing it, looking for certain things. And take, for example, the words that are underlined in red there as a first example. The words in this group are keys, wallet, library books, umbrellas. Now, the first thing you have to realize is that Kubrick could have chosen any words for this particular group here. He could have chosen pocket change, or credit cards, or pens and pencils. The fact that he chose these specific words is an indication that they fit. They contain the letters that he wants to use for his message. And I think it's worth pointing out also that this list of words does not constitute a grammatically correct sentence. In other words, Kubrick wasn't constrained by the rules of grammar with these words, which gives him, I think, a lot of flexibility in constructing the message he wants to construct. Moving on to the words in green there: broccoli, yogurt, shampoo, and the letters B, M, Y, F, and S. You can say the same thing about these words essentially as you did with the words in red there. Kubrick could have chosen any words he wanted. He could have chosen cereal, or celery, or lettuce, or whatever. Another reason why I zeroed in on these particular words here is, recall in part 2, from this particular list of items, broccoli, Mr. Muscle, yogurt, Fritos, and shampoo. In part 2, we used Mr. Muscle and Fritos to decode the message in that video. And recall the reason why those 2 were used was because they were both proper nouns. That's the one thing they had in common. Now, for these words, broccoli, yogurt, shampoo, they have one thing in common as well, in that they are not proper nouns. And so it occurred to me that Kubrick is using this group of words here to make another message. And it makes sense also to throw in those lowercase letters there, as you can see: B, M, Y, F, and S. Now, as for the words in blue, keys, hours, and article, as you can see, all 3 of these words appear multiple times throughout the letter. Keys and hours appear 3 times, and article appears 4 times. So Kubrick seems to be emphasizing these 3 words. So that's why I believe they contain a message as well. So these are the 3 groups of words that we're going to proceed with to decode. Now, but before we do that, keep in mind the phrase "more cats." As I demonstrated in part 3, this phrase is used with every single group of words that are decoded. As I said in part 3, it's apparently the case that Kubrick has set up his messages in this letter so that the phrase "more cats" is necessary to decode all of them. It's sort of like I guess you would call a skeleton key, or a universal puzzle piece that fits in every single puzzle that Kubrick has set up in this letter. So we have our three groups of words. The next thing to do is the same step that we've taken in the previous two parts, which is to break down the words into the letter frequency count, and I've done that in all three instances, as you can see here. Now, in terms of examining the individual words for clues as to where to go, there's not a lot of work to work with here, but we can make educated guesses along the lines of something to do with the Taliesin massacre, Frank Lloyd Wright, the Rothschilds, Mema, etc., etc. And so I went through that process, and what I want to go through now is just in rapid succession show you what I've come up with as far as what these messages are saying. First will be the group of words which are keys, wallet, library books, umbrellas, and more cats. So grinding away at this group here, I arrived at this message, which the first thing I want to point out is that the red numbers and blue numbers match. That's always important. And what I want to do now is just briefly talk about the significance of this message. It's actually quite significant. And the reason it's significant is that Kubrick here is telling us what the motive was behind the Rothschilds causing the Taliesin massacre. He's telling us that I think it's pretty clear that Lloyd Wright and Mema were going to go public with knowledge they had regarding Charles Rothschild abusing children. Now, at this point, it's not clear how they came across this information or when they came across this information, but this in my mind is very, very significant. The reason I find this so significant is this is a slide from the video series Kubrick's Catcher in the Rye Code, which I previously alluded to. And I was really struggling to find a motive. I managed to decode that message that Kubrick had embedded using the Catcher in the Rye, where he pointed the finger at the Rothschilds as being responsible for the Taliesin massacre, but I could not discern a motive for them doing this. But when I decoded this message here, it finally dawned on me what the motive was. So again, this is for such a short message here, it's very important. Moving on, the next batch we're going to look at is the broccoli yogurt shampoo BMYFS and more cats group. And this is the message I arrived at. Again, verify that the blue and red numbers match. Here, apparently Kubrick is expanding on the message that we decoded in part 2. HFRI refers to Herbert Fritz. He was working at Taliesin as a draftsman at the time of the massacre. C's refers to C notes or money. Again, MB refers to Mama Borthwick. Boy is her son, John, and MC is Martha Cheney, her daughter. The last batch of letters that are going to be decoded are article, keys, hours, and more cats. And this is the message I arrived at. It's pretty clear what Kubrick is saying. I don't think I need to explain this one. And so this is the final message which I've decoded from this letter. I think at this point it makes sense to sort of take a step back and look at what we have so far. So what I want to do for the remainder of this video is just summarize the 5 messages we have decoded so far. So as you can see, what I've done here is I've underlined in different colors all of the words or letters that have been used for all 5 messages, and in the upper left corner I tell you which part of this video series you can find these particular messages. Now, the next thing I want to do is, one right after the other, show you the 5 messages that have been decoded. And I've arranged these messages in from the standpoint of the narrative that I believe Kubrick is trying to provide for us regarding the Taliesin massacre. Now, as I said, I just want to run through them very quickly. You can hit the pause button if you want. What I want to do, however, is I want to focus on what I consider to be a theme that is pervasive throughout these stream of messages here. When you group these 5 messages together and look at them in total, I think it's interesting that 3 of the 5 messages describe Charles Rothschild as either a pederast, an abuser, or a molester. And I think it's reasonable to conclude, based on this, that this was an issue that Kubrick was concerned with when he was making these messages. This was something he really wanted to drive home to us. And with this in mind, I think it's interesting to note that when you look through or study or analyze what other serious researchers of this movie have said, you do occasionally come up with some people who believe that child abuse is something that this movie, The Shining, is concerned with. Up until now, I wasn't inclined to really give a whole lot of thought or consideration to these opinions, but considering these messages that we've seen, I think it's reasonable to look at the movie, revisit a couple moments in the movie with these ideas and reevaluate what we think we know, or what we think the movie is about, or what we think the movie is trying to convey to us. In particular, I want to revisit this scene here, which I'm sure you remember. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always assumed that what was being shown here were, in the context of the movie, were 2 adult men engaged in some sort of kinky or perverse role play act. But when you reevaluate this scene with the idea that Kubrick was concerned with the notion of child abuse or sexual abuse of children, I think you can come up with some very interesting observations. Consider, for example, this bear outfit that is being worn. When you look closely at what is going on here, you can see that on the rear end of is exposed there. In other words, there's a flap that's hanging down. And the point I'm getting at is that this isn't so much a bear suit as it is a pair of pajamas. And furthermore, it's the sort of thing that a child would wear. And when you look at this scene in this manner, in conjunction with the messages that we have just decoded, I think it's reasonable to conclude that what Kubrick is doing here is that he's trying to suggest that the evil and malign supernatural entities which haunt the Overlook Hotel have the facet of child abuse or pedophilia to them. And when you come to the conclusion that pedophilia is one of the aspects to the evil ghosts or spirits haunting the Overlook Hotel, then the impact that it has on Jack Torrance takes on a new light. I think it's pretty clear in the context of the movie that the reason why Jack Torrance descends into homicidal madness is because he's being influenced by the Overlook Hotel, the supernatural forces of the Overlook Hotel. And if that's true, then this scene then starts to come into focus here. I think what Kubrick is showing here is basically that Jack Torrance is morphing into a pedophile. And furthermore, if you believe, like I and many other people do, that The Shining is referring to real people and real events, then you can take this idea a step further and point out that really what Kubrick is showing here is Jack Torrance being possessed or taken over by the spirit of Nathaniel Charles Rothschild, the pederast, the abuser, the shit-sack molester. So these were just a couple examples off the top of my head to illustrate this new facet to The Shining. But I'm going to stop here for now. Coming up in part 5, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue the analysis of page 10 from this issue of Playgirl magazine. I am done with this Beneath My Yurt letter. However, there are other aspects to this page, page 10, which I think are interesting. And so that will be coming up pretty soon. Stay tuned and I'll see you then.